The woods are an ambiguous place in folklore. They're full of great possibility. For example, in the stories we'll hear today, the children find all the food they want, and they also find treasure. But the woods are also full of danger. Sometimes there's a witch living in there, or an ogre. When we go deep into the woods, we're surrounded by the trees, by other animals, by possibility, and by threats, which is why this image is so powerful in folklore, for the times when we feel completely submerged in an unknown situation. Have you ever felt like you were facing a problem that seemed to envelop you? Maybe you went to a new school or a new job, or maybe someone unexpectedly went out of your life. You went through a separation, and it felt like you were swallowed whole. Nothing about this place looks familiar, and you can't find your way out. In the two stories we'll hear today, there's something really wicked hiding out there in the woods. But don't worry, because remember, this section of stories is all about besting evil powers. These are stories of triumph. And as you listen to this first story, which is the classic German version of Hansel and Gretel by the Grimm brothers, listen for the reason why the children are out there in the woods in the first place. And listen for the surprise ending in this classic version. At the edge of a forest, there once lived a woodcutter, his wife, and his 2 children. There was never much to eat in the house, for there was famine in their land. And one day, the stepmother told the father what had to be done. They must take the children out into the deepest part of the forest and leave them there. Now the children overheard the stepmother, and Hansel began to think of a plan. And when all were asleep, Hansel put on his jacket and opened the lowermost part of the door and slipped out of the house. And the moon was bright, and it made the white pebbles on the walkway outside their house shine and glow in the reflected light. And he filled his pockets with pebbles and stole back inside. The next day, the woodcutter and his wife led the children out into the woods, and as they did, Hansel quietly dropped pebble after pebble behind him. Well, the woodcutter gave the children some bread, and the children fell asleep. And when they woke in the full moonlight, the pebbles shone like newly minted coins, pointing the way home for them. And not long after that, severe famine struck every inch of the land. There was no food. And the parents, once again, they gave each child a slice of bread and led them out into the woods. And Hansel dropped the white breadcrumbs behind. But while the children slept, the birds nibbled them all away. And for 3 days and 3 nights, they wandered hungry deeper and deeper into the woods, eating berries until their little legs could carry them no longer. And on the 3rd day, they saw a beautiful bird, white as snow, and they followed until the bird perched on the roof of a little house. And as they got closer, they saw that the house was built entirely out of gingerbread. The roof on which the bird perched was made of cake with windows of hard, transparent sugar. And Hansel's mouth started to water. And while Hansel reached up and broke off a piece of the roof, Gretel nibbled on a window pane. And with their mouths sticky and still on that house, they heard a voice inside. "Nibble, nibble, is it a mouse? Who is nibbling at my house?" Hansel tore off a great piece of the roof, and Gretel knocked out an entire window pane and sat down on the ground to savor it. Suddenly, the door opened, and a woman as old as the hills, leaning on a crutch, hobbled out. "Children, come and stay with me. You'll not meet any harm here." She took them by the hand and led them into the little sugar house, and she fed them milk, pancakes, sugar, apples. And then they lay down in little beds where they fell asleep. And as they slept, she sniffed her way over to Hansel and grabbed him and closed him up in a small shed with the door barred. No! And then she went to Gretel and shook her. Wait, lazy girl, wake up! Fetch some water and cook up a good meal for your brother. He is waiting to be fattened up. When he puts on enough weight, I will eat him. Well, every day, Gretel would cook for him. And every day, the old woman would hobble over, smelling her way over, for she didn't see well. And she told Hansel, stick your finger out so I can tell if you are plump enough. But Hansel had a small bone, which he would stick out and sit dead. Still scrawny. Gretel, more food. But after 4 weeks of this, she finally said, well, I do not care whether Hansel's plump or scrawny. I will eat him tomorrow. And the next morning, early, Gretel filled the kettle with water. She filled it up with water and lit a fire. First, we'll do some baking. And she pushed Gretel closer to the oven where the flames were leaping. Crawl in there and see if it is hot enough to slide the bread in. But Gretel, she saw what was on the witch's mind, and she said, I do not know how to get in there. How do you do it? Oh, silly goosey, it is easy. Even I can get in there. And the witch stuck her head into the oven, and Gretel gave her a big push, and wham! Shut the iron door and bolted it. Ah! Well, she got Hansel out of the shed, and they jumped up and down for joy, and then they rushed back into the witch's house, and inside, in every corner, there were chests filled with pearls and jewels, and they stuffed their pockets. Now, said Hansel, we've got to get out of this witch's forest. They walked until they came to a wide lake. And Gretel looked over. Oh, there is a little white duck. Help us, little duck. And they each took turns riding over the water on the back of the little duck. And when they got to the other side, the woods began to look familiar. And they found their little cottage, and they found that their father had been in despair since he left the children in the woods. And the stepmother, she had died. And Gretel and Hansel emptied out their pockets, and the treasure rolled all over the floor, and they lived together in perfect happiness. Folklorists believe that stories like Hansel and Gretel may have begun during the Great Famine in Europe, during the late medieval age, about 700 years ago. There had been a huge population boom, so many people, and then there was too much rain and too little rain, and the crops failed season after season. And for the children in this story, the famine is what prompts the children's adventures out in the woods. And we get all these delicious and creepy images of food out there, the sticky sugar windows and plumping up the brother. The woods bring this excess of food and of danger. Now, this is where the repeating motifs in stories are fun. Listen to this different version of the same story and look for these 3 different story motifs: the famine, outsmarting your opponent, and crossing a wide gulf. In this Scottish version of Hansel and Gretel, there's something else living out in a house deep in the woods. Here's the story of Molly Whoopie. Once upon a time, there was a family, and the family was very poor. They were so poor they couldn't afford to feed all of their children, and so they took their 3 youngest children, take your 3 fingers, and they sent them out the door into the world. Boop, boop, boop. Shut the door on them. And the 3 girls sitting out there facing the woods, oh, they were afraid. And the oldest girl, she shivered. She shivered. And the second oldest girl, she quaked, everybody quaked. But the third, the youngest, oh, her name was Molly Whoopie. Can you say her name with me? Molly Whoopie. And she was brave, she was smart, and she was clever. And Molly, she looked out into those woods and she said, well, so that's the world. Well, let's go out into it then. And they walked out into the woods, Molly leading. And they walked out deep into the woods. It was starting to get dark. The moon was coming out. They could see it through the trees. And, they were going deeper into the woods. And suddenly they saw a glow coming from far off. They could see that it was a house. And the door of that house, it opened, and in the glow coming from the back part of where that house was, it outlined the enormous figure of the largest woman whom Molly Whoopie had ever seen. And the oldest daughter, she shivered. And the second oldest daughter, she quaked. But Molly, she was brave, she was smart, and she was clever. And she walked right up to that woman and said, "Can you please spare us a bit of food? We're starving. We haven't eaten in days. Can you please give us some food?" "Oh, no. Oh, no, you cannot be here. No, don't you know, my man is a giant, and he would eat you as soon as look at you. Oh, please, we're dying of hunger. Please, just give us a wee bit of food, and then we'll be on our way." "Oh, all right, come on in." And so the giantess woman, the wife of the giant, she let them come on in, and she sat them down. And so each of them sat down, and the woman gave them something to eat. She cut off a giant slice of bread, and she handed it to each of the girls. And the girls took their giant slices of bread. Everybody take your giant slice of bread. Oh, and they ate up that bread. And then the giantess woman, she poured them each a giant cup of milk, and she gave them the giant cup of milk, and they each took their giant cup of milk. Everybody take your cup of milk. And they drank their giant cup of milk, and then she got them a giant cookie, and she gave each of them a giant cookie. Everybody ate their giant cookie. Well, just as those crumbs from the giant cookies were falling down on the floor, they heard, "Fee, fi, fo, fum!" And in through the door burst the largest man whom Molly Whoopie and her sisters had ever seen. And he spied those girls, and he locked eyes with Molly. Well, the oldest girl, she shivered. The second oldest girl, she quaked. But Molly Whoopie, she was brave. She was smart, and she was clever, and she just stared right back at that giant, and the giant stared back at her. Molly stared at the giant stared back at her, and the giantess woman stepped in between them and said, "No, you'll not harm a hair on the heads of these girls. No, they're hungry, they're getting a bite to eat, and then they'll be on their way. You'll stay the night." Ha! He went over, cut himself a giant slice of bread. Everybody cut your giant bread. Ate up his giant bread. And he poured himself a giant glass of milk. And he drank his milk. And he got himself out his giant cookie. And they all began to get ready for bed. And the giant, he stretched himself, and as he stretched himself, each of his 3 giantess daughters got into their bed. And they all laid down together, 1, 2, 3, and on the other side of that bed, the giantess woman, she put those other 3 girls, 1, 2, 3. And the giantess woman, she got into her own bed. But Molly Whoopie noticed something. Before the giant got into his bed, he came over to each of his daughters, and he took gold chains, and he put those gold chains around the necks of each of his daughters. And he took chains of straw and put those chains of straw around the necks of each of the 3 other girls. Well, the other 2 daughters, they had fallen asleep, the 2 sisters. And the 3 giantess daughters, they had fallen asleep. And the giant himself got into bed. Giantess woman, she had fallen asleep, and the giant, he was asleep and snored so loudly he shook the rafters. Well, Molly, she stayed awake. She thought, there must be something to these necklaces. And remember, Molly, she was brave. She was smart, and she was clever. And so she crept out of bed when everyone else was asleep, and she took those chains of straw off of her neck, and off of her sisters' necks. And she went over and she took those chains of gold off of the giantess sisters' necks. And she swapped them. She put the straw around those giantess sisters. And she put the chains of gold around her own sisters and her own neck. And then she came back into bed. And she pretended to sleep. And soon enough, the giant, he woke up. He felt around in that room. It was dark. And that giant, he felt around and he reached for his club. And he picked up that club. And he started to feel around to the necks of those girls. And he felt around. Ah, gold. That's my daughters. And he felt over to the other side of the bed. He felt straw. Ha ha! And he raised up his club. And whackety, 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 ha ha ha! And for each of those whackities, he heard whackety, ooh, whackety, ooh, whackety, ooh. Set down his club. When he went back to bed, well, Molly Whoopie, she decided it was time to leave. And so she woke up, she woke each of her sisters up, and they crept out of that giant's house, and they ran. They ran and they ran 3 days and that many nights until they came to a castle, a tall castle. Oh, and it was such a large castle, they were a little bit intimidated by it. The oldest sister, she shivered. And the second oldest sister, she quaked. But Molly Whoopie, she was brave, she was smart, and she was clever. She walked right up to the king himself of that castle. She said, "Oh, you wouldn't believe we've had a time." And she told him all about how they had come to the giant's house in the middle of the woods and how they had escaped with their lives. And the king of that castle, he said, "Ah, Molly, you've done well, but you'd do better still if you went back to that giant's home and you brought me back the giant sword that hangs above the giant's bed. You go back and bring me the giant's sword, and your oldest sister can marry my oldest son." Well, Molly liked the idea of that because that meant her oldest sister, well, she would be queen someday. She'd be married to the oldest prince. I'd like that. And so off she walked, back through the woods, 3 days and 3 nights until she came to that house. She crept inside, and she crept underneath the bed of that giant. And soon enough, back home, that evening, fee-fi-fo-fum, he came in. He cut himself his giant slice of bread. He poured himself his giant cup of milk. And he ate himself his giant cookie. Oh, and went into bed, pulled up the covers, and snored so loudly he shook the rafters. And when she was sure he was asleep, she snuck out from underneath that bed. And she saw the giant's sword hanging there above the bed. And she reached up. Everybody reach up. She reached up. She grabbed hold of that sword. She pulled it off of the wall. But when she did, oh, it was heavier than she thought it was going to be. And as soon as she pulled it off, it clang! It clunked down onto the ground. And Molly looked up. And right at that moment, the giant opened his eyes. And the giant looked at Molly. And Molly looked back at the giant. And the giant looked at Molly. And Molly looked back at the giant. And you know what she said? Bye-bye. And she picked up that sword. Everybody pick up your sword. And she ran with it. She ran and she ran. And back behind her came the giant. Boom, 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 boom. Back chasing after her. And she ran and she came to a deep ravine. She couldn't get across it. She didn't know how she would get across. But she had that sword in one hand. Hold up your sword. And with the other hand, she reached over to her own head, and don't actually do this, but she plucked out one of her hairs, and she flung it across that ravine, and it became a bridge of one hair. And she stepped across that bridge. Oh, and she got across the ravine. Well, the giant, he was too he was too large to go across that bridge of one hair, and he called out to her on the other side, "Woe to you, Molly!" You know what she said? "Ha ha!" And off she walked back to the castle. And the king was happy. She gave the king the sword. The king took the sword, and she said that Molly's oldest sister could marry his oldest son. "Ah, Molly, you've done well, but you'd do even better still if you went back to that giant's home. And you brought me the giant sack of gold that the giant hides underneath his pillow. You bring me that giant sack of gold, and your second oldest sister can marry my second oldest son." Well, Molly liked the idea of that. Another member of her family would be royalty. I'll try. And on Molly walked, back to the giant's house, 3 days, that many nights, until she came to the house, crept underneath the bed, and hid. Sure enough, that evening, who came home? Boom, 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 boom. Fee, fi, fo, fum. He came in. He sliced himself a giant slice of bread. He poured himself a giant glass of milk. And he ate himself a giant cookie. And when he was tired, he went into bed, pulled up those sheets, and snored so loudly he shook the bed. And when she was sure he was asleep, she crept out. She looked over. She could see underneath the pillow that he slept on, where his own head was lying. Oh, she could see that glint of gold in that sack. Very good, in that sack. Oh, and she grabbed hold of that sack, and she tugged, and she tugged, and she tugged, and on the third tug, oh, that sack of gold, it came loose. But those gold coins in that sack, they clinked together, and that was just enough to wake up the giant. And the giant looked at Molly, and Molly looked at the giant, and the giant looked at Molly, and Molly looked at the giant. And you know what Molly said? Bye-bye. And she ran, and the giant came after her. Boom, 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 boom. And as Molly ran with that sack in her hand, everybody hold up the sack of gold. In their other hand, she reached up again. Don't actually take it out, but bing! She plucked off a hair. She flung it across that deep ravine that she came to. It became a bridge of one hair. She stepped across it. She got to the other side. The giant, he was too large. "Woe to you, Molly!" What did she say? "Ha ha!" Back she walked, saying, "Ah, Molly, you've done well. Your second oldest sister can marry my second oldest son. You've done well, but you'd do even better still if you went back to that giant's house and you took the giant ring that's around his finger. You bring me the giant's ring, you can marry my youngest son." Well, Molly really liked the idea of that. She said, I'll really try. And back she walked through the woods, all the way back 3 days, that many nights, until she came to that house, hid underneath the bed. That evening, what did she hear? Fee, fi, fo, fum. Oh, he came in, the giant. He cut himself a giant slice of bread. He poured himself a giant cup of milk. And he ate himself a giant cookie. Oh, with all the crumbs on the floor, he found his way over to his bed, sat down on it, pulled up the covers, and snored so loudly he shook the rafters. And when she was sure he was asleep, she crept out. And he had his hand flopped over to where she could see that ring. And so she grabbed hold of that giant ring. Everybody grab hold. And she gave it a tug. Didn't come loose. Another tug. Didn't come loose. Third try. And at that, it came loose. But the giant had woken up just in time. And with his other hand, he grabbed hold of Molly's hand. And he said, "I've got you now. Ah, Molly, I've got you now. You tell me what you would do if I had tricked you into beating your own daughters, and if I had stolen your sword, if I had stolen your gold and tried to steal your ring, what would you do?" And at that point, the giant started to reach for his club. Oh, but Molly, she was afraid, but Molly was brave. She was smart, and she was clever, and she thought up a plan as quick as that. She said, "Oh, if I were you and someone else had done that to me, I would go get a sack. I would get a sack, and I would put me inside that sack, and then I would go and get a dog." What did the dog say? Ruff. Very good. "And I would put that in the sack, and I would go get a cat." And what did the cat say? Meow. And I would put that in the sack, and then I would get a needle and thread and some scissors, and I would put those into the sack, and then I would hang me up, and I'd go out into the woods, and I'd get the biggest branch I could find, and then I'd come back in, and I would beat myself with it. And the giant said, well, that's a better plan than what I had. He set down his club, and he went and got a sack. Ready to get your sack? He put Molly into it. He took the dog, put that inside, took the cat, threw that inside, got a needle and thread and some scissors, and put those inside, tied it up, hung it up, and went out into the woods to find the biggest branch he could find to go and beat Molly Whoopie with. Well, while she was hanging up in that sack with all of those things, she could hear the giant's wife busy cooking in that kitchen. Well, Molly, she cried out from inside the sack, oh, if you could see the sight that I see, oh, you wouldn't believe what I see in here. And the giant's wife started to get curious. Oh, what? Oh, what do you see, Molly? What do you see? Oh, you wouldn't believe what I see in here. Oh, what's in the sack? Oh, Molly, tell me what's in the sack. Well, she got so curious, Molly said, oh, well, if you want to see, you can just come right on in inside. And so Molly, she took those scissors, everybody take the scissors, and she cut a hole in that sack. She hopped out of it, and she took the giantess woman, everybody take the woman, and she helped that giantess woman fit back into that sack where Molly had been. And she took the needle, and she took the thread, and she sewed that hole right back up. So the giantess woman was now inside the sack, and Molly went and she hid. And the giantess woman inside that sack, she looked around, she said, Molly, I didn't see a thing. What was it that you saw in here? And right about that time, who came in? Boom, 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 boom. The giant, who was dragging behind him the largest tree branch that could fit in that house. And he picked up that tree branch. Everybody pick up a tree branch. I've got you now, Molly Whoopie. And he commenced to whackety-whackety-whacketying that sack. And every time he whackety, he could hear a ow, whackety, ow, whackety, ow. But there was also what else in that sack? Meow, and the dog and the cat. And every time the giantess wife started to say, oh, Blit, no, it's me, the cat would say, meow, and the dog would fight, and they would fight all together, and he couldn't understand a word of what anyone was saying in that sack. He just kept on going, whackety, oh, whackety, oh, whackety, oh. And Molly, with that giant ring still in her hands, she crept out of that house and started running. Oh, but as soon as she got to that doorway, the giant saw the motion out of the corner of his eye. He was mid-whackety. He turned, and he saw Molly. And Molly saw the giant. And the giant saw Molly, and Molly saw the giant. And what did she say? Bye-bye. Bye-bye. And she ran. She ran. And what did the giant do? Boom, 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 boom. Right, running after them. And she came to that deep ravine. She had the ring in one hand. With the other hand, she plucked out one of her own hairs, flung it across. It became a bridge of one hair. She stepped across it. She got to the other side. The giant cried out, woe to you, Molly. What did she say? And she walked back to the castle. And the king said, Molly, you've done well. You can marry my youngest son. And Molly and her prince lived happily after that. And they were never again bothered by that giant. But they did forever after that enjoy giant cookies. The end. This telling of Molly Whoopie has details from 2 different versions and 2 different regions of Scotland. The most significant difference between the 2 versions is that in one version, Molly and her sisters are cast out by their parents. And in the other version, Molly takes her sisters out to seek their fortune. Molly is a strong female protagonist anyway, with or without her instigating her own means of escape. But if she's thrown out into the woods, it makes her journey into the giant's house and her escape a journey of survival and personal discovery. She learns that she is brave and smart and clever. That repetitive epithet is my own addition to the story, along with a giant cookie. I added that in because every story is better with a giant cookie. Have you ever had to use your wits to get out of a tough situation? When was the last time you were brave, or smart, or clever, or all three? In both of these stories, children left to their own devices do very well on their own by mastering their own fears and using their wits. Now, these stories resonate with everyone because people never really ever lose that fear of being entirely on their own. And we welcome a story about a vulnerable character who survives and even thrives in the face of overwhelming threats, literally as well as figuratively. That ogre. Ooh. In our next lecture, it's naming our enemies that's the key to defeating them. Join us next time for Rumpelstiltskin.